The fork hit the floor, clanging with a cold, sharp sound, as if someone had accidentally struck the opening bell for a play I knew by heart. Carter, 8 years old, my stepmother's son, sat perched on his chair, leaning back lazily, legs swinging, his face expressionless. He didn't look at me when he spoke, just uttered a single word like he was ordering a waiter water. I placed the glass of apple juice on the table in front of him, my hands trying not to tremble. The bland smell of beef stew lingered in the air, mingling with the dim glow of the cheap candle I'd carefully lit. I used to think that if dinner was prepared just right, if the napkins were neatly folded, if the candlelight was warm enough, this family might look real. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe Dad wouldn't unbuckle his belt. I knew better than to hope. I said with ice, my stepmother Nora said coldly, her eyes glued to her phone. I turned back to the kitchen, grabbed ice from the freezer, and returned. As I set the glass down, Carter let out a loud sigh, as if I'd just wasted an hour of his precious time. Too slow, he muttered, picking up his fork, squinting at it, and then letting it fall to the floor. Oops. I bent down. The cold tile bit through the thin fabric of my pajamas, stinging my knees. I picked up the fork, wiped it with a napkin, and placed it back in its spot. As I gently pulled out my chair to sit, Nora's voice cut through like a razor. He eats first, then you clear. He's the king. You know your place. I paused. Just for a second. Not long. I was hungry, hadn't eaten anything since a burnt crust of bread that morning. But I stood up. I didn't react, didn't question, didn't argue. My father, Mr. Bennett, finally looked up. What did she just do? He asked, his voice slow, his eyes darkening like the sky before a storm. Carter giggled. She sat down. Dad slammed his fork on the table. Who gave you permission? I didn't speak, but my eyes didn't drop. Juice, Carter called again, his voice sharp. His glass was still full. I turned to Dad. He has hands. He can pour it himself. The air froze. I heard the sound of leather sliding through denim loops, the belt being pulled free. That was the moment you know you're about to get hurt, and you know you can't run. I stepped back. One step. Dad stepped forward. The first blow landed on my left arm. The second hit my back. I screamed. Nora stood up not to stop him. She strode over, gripped my chin hard, her nails digging into my skin. You feed him or you're out of this house, you useless thing. Then the third blow struck my shoulder. Carter burst out laughing. I didn't cry, didn't beg. I just turned, walked toward the hallway, trembling, but not falling. I didn't grab my bag, there was nothing to take. I shoved my hands into the pockets of my old hoodie, a crumpled dollar bill. Toothbrush, no. The door slammed shut before I could ask. The lock clicked behind me like a final period. Standing there, barefoot on the cold concrete, I looked up at the porch where I used to sleep. The porch light flickered, unsure if it was the wind, or if even it doubted I was worth illuminating. I dug my nails into my bruised arm. A small voice in my head, don't fall. Not here. I walked. $1 in my pocket. Arm limp. No shoes. No goodbye. No one in that house asked if I was alive or dead. I am Elena Ruth Bennett. 23 years old. Born to a father without the courage to love me, and a woman without the kindness to call me her own. I was thrown out like trash. But I knew one thing, those who abandoned me never thought I'd stand tall again, that I'd have a story to tell. But I'm telling it now. And you won't believe what happened next. I don't remember how many steps I took. Only that each time my foot hit the rough, freezing pavement, the pain shot from my soles to my knees, tightening in my chest. Bakersfield's sky wasn't raining that night, but the air was cold enough for my breath to turn to white mist. $1 in my pocket, my left arm dangling like it no longer belonged to me. And I, Elena Ruth Bennett, had nowhere to return to. Night fell like a damp, heavy blanket, impossible to warm. I walked without knowing where. I just knew I had to leave that street, that porch, where the flickering light had watched me be pushed out like something unwanted. I followed the sidewalk, trying to keep my breathing steady. The shops on both sides were closed. The yellow glow from a convenience store at the corner was the first light I'd seen since the door slammed shut behind me. I pushed the door open. The smell of plastic tinfoil and cheap chemicals hit my nose. A middle-aged man stood behind the counter, not looking at me, his voice tired. Bathrooms for customers. I nodded, forcing a faint smile. I wandered the aisles, drinks, snacks, gum batteries, lighters, everything I couldn't afford. My eyes landed on a row of bottled water. I picked the smallest one, 89 cents. When I placed it on the counter, the clerk glanced at me for the first time. "Want a bag?" I shook my head. What did I have to put in a bag? I took the bottle and went around back to the public restroom. The gray tiles were speckled with mold, the mirror cracked in one corner, the sink dripping. I looked at myself in the warped glass left eye, swollen lip-scratched collar stained with dried blood. I didn't recognize the girl in the mirror, but I knew the pain seeping under my skin. I didn't cry. There were no tears left. Leaving the store, I walked again. The wind blew sand across my face. Across the street, a park bench appeared. I sat down, careful not to let my sore arm touch the cold metal. The silence around me wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that suffocates. I took out the water, sipped a little, and closed my eyes. But I wasn't left alone for long. Footsteps. Giggles. A group of teenagers, 4 of them, dressed flashy, came closer from the end of the street. I turned my face away, curling into myself instinctively. One of them pointed at me, laughing. "Hey look, it's the street-sleeping princess." Another voice chimed in. "Want to drink Cinderella?" Before I could react, a soda can flew at my chest. The cold, sticky liquid soaked me. I jerked back, the pain in my shoulder flaring, making me dizzy. They roared with laughter, running off their footsteps, echoing on the pavement. I didn't scream, didn't chase them. I just wiped the soda with my sleeve, smearing the stickiness. I stood up again, kept walking. Each step was a challenge. I'd been hit, kicked out, looked down on, and now humiliated in public. Bakersfield at night wasn't made for abandoned daughters. I passed a red brick church. The door was locked. I knocked twice. No one answered. Even God was busy tonight. A little further, I saw the glow of a street lamp at the end of the road. I shuffled toward it, sat on the concrete, my back against the cold iron pole. The smell of metal exhaust and dust. My arm was nearly numb, but I was still breathing, still here. I looked up at the starless sky, whispering just loud enough for myself to hear. "I'm still here." I closed my eyes but didn't sleep. The distant hum of cars. The faint smell of fast food carried by the wind. And then, footsteps. Different from the teenagers' laughter, these were heavy, slow, steady, like their owner was used to walking endlessly, with no one waiting. I opened my eyes. A tall, thin black man with patchy stubble and a worn knit cap. In his hands, a brown paper bag and a rolled-up blanket. "Hungry kid." His voice was soft as the breeze, raspy but warm. I didn't answer. I was used to staying guarded, but he didn't say more, just sat beside me, keeping a polite distance. He opened the bag, pulled out a white sandwich wrapped in wax paper, and slowly broke it in half. "Don't have to eat if you don't want," he said, offering me half. "But it don't cost nothing to share." I took it. His hands were warm, rough, like broken stone. I took a bite. The sandwich was cold dry, but it was the first thing I'd swallowed all day without choking. "Name's Elijah," he said after a while. "Elijah Burke. Folks call me Mr. Elijah or Old Man Burke. Depends on the day." I nodded slightly. "What's your name?" he asked, not pushing. "Elena." "Nice name," he smiled. We sat in silence. Neither of us spoke again, and I didn't feel completely alone anymore. Elijah told me he'd been a courthouse janitor, a soldier in Vietnam, and had slept on porches for 3 winters before getting a spot at Grace's shelter down the street. His voice was steady like small waves, not loud, not complaining. "Life knocks you down sometimes," he said. "Don't mean you gotta stay on the ground." I looked at the half sandwich in my hand, nodding quietly. Elijah pulled a thin blanket from his bag and handed it to me. "Keep it. It's cold tonight." I clutched the blanket, and for the first time that day, tears fell. Not from pain, but because someone gave me something without expecting anything back. We sat under the street lamp, saying nothing more, just letting silence do its work, mending the thinnest tears in a person's heart. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but at least tonight I wasn't completely invisible. Elijah stood up eventually. "There's a pottery studio at Miss Evelyn's. You should try it. Don't need to be good, just real." I nodded, held the blanket, the smell of wax paper, the words of a kind stranger. I never thought a cold sandwich and a worn blanket could change the course of my life. But sometimes the smallest things are the first pieces to rebuild a broken person. The next morning I woke under the pale gold light of a Bakersfield dawn, curled in the blanket Elijah gave me. No nightmares. No sound of a belt whipping. No scolding voice from the living room. Just the soft wind and the steady breathing of a kind stranger lying a bench away. Elijah didn't wake me. When I opened my eyes, he was sitting quietly, his rough hands holding a paper cup of hot water, maybe tea from a shop he knew well. "Morning," he said, eyes still on the dew-damp street. I nodded slightly. My shoulder still ached. My right arm was nearly numb. But I was still here, still breathing. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel invisible. He handed me another cup of hot water, its warmth spreading through my frozen fingers. "Not coffee," he chuckled. "Just water with ginger. But it's better than silence." I gave a faint smile, then exhaled deeply. "Thank you, for everything." Elijah shrugged. "No big deal. Someone did it for me once. I'm just passing it on." We sat like that for a long time. Sometimes someone's presence, without words, without reasons, just there is enough to soothe. After finishing the water, Elijah stood, folded his blanket, and turned to me. "Come with me for a bit. Got a place I want to show you." I didn't ask where, didn't hesitate. I just stood, my feet stinging on the concrete. He noticed and pulled a pair of old sandals from his bag straps, worn but clean. Size 7, lucky. I slipped them on. They fit strangely well, like he'd prepared for this. Like someone finally knew what I needed without me asking. We walked a few blocks to an old building with weathered brick walls, but a clean glass door displaying rows of charming imperfect pottery, each piece crooked real. A small wooden sign on the door read, "Cedar Clay Studio." "Owner's name is Evelyn," Elijah said. "Tough, but good heart. I used to clean the bathrooms here. Now I come back sometimes to help with odd jobs." I stood silently staring through the glass. Something about the way those tilted clay cups stood side by side made me feel maybe I had a place to exist too. Elijah opened the door, the bell jingling. A woman in her 50s, silver hair tied back, wearing a clay-stained apron, looked up from her pottery wheel. "Elijah," she said, not smiling, but her eyes not cold. "This is Elena," he said. "She needs a place to start." Evelyn didn't ask why. Didn't look at the bruise on my neck or my arm clutching my shoulder. She just nodded, pointing to a wooden chair by the table. "Sit. Make her some ginger tea, Elijah. I've got clay to shape." Elijah smiled, poured water. I sat the room smelling of damp clay and something sweet like cinnamon, like dry wood. Everything here was quiet, not from emptiness, but from people respecting each other's silence. "Ever done pottery?" Evelyn asked without looking up. "No, ma'am." "No matter. Clay doesn't need you to be skilled, just real." She handed me a brown lump of clay wrapped in damp cloth. Heavy and cold. "Here," she said, placing it in my palms. "It remembers everything, but it forgives easily." I didn't understand right away, but something in her words stung my eyes. I started kneading the clay. My hands were clumsy clay falling on my shirt, smearing my cheek. Elijah sat nearby, not laughing, just handing me a cloth to wipe. Evelyn didn't say more, just glanced over occasionally and nodded. When I shaped something resembling a bowl, ugly enough to hide, Evelyn came over, looked closely, and said, "Not bad. It's a bit off. But you can carve something on the rim, if you want." I took a small wooden tool, hands trembling. But then I carved 2 words. "Still here." Evelyn looked, nodded slightly. "You sure are." That night Elijah walked me to his shelter, a run-down place with a shared kitchen and a small bed. He said he'd talk to the manager to let me stay a few nights, and the studio would give me odd jobs enough for food. I looked back at the studio under the sunset. The cracked brick walls, the old glass door, the jingle of the bell when it opened, all became the first signs I wasn't adrift anymore. Before we parted, Elijah placed a hand on my shoulder, the less sore one, and said, "You don't have to tell your story if you're not ready. But don't let anyone else write it for you." I gripped my hoodie. It was the first time I believed I could still control something. I didn't need to be the good daughter. Didn't need to be the servant. Didn't need to be perfect. Some things don't need to be said to be understood. A bruise on an arm, a glance averted, or the way someone gently places clay in your hands, as if saying, "It's okay." Start here. That first morning at Cedar Clay Studio, I didn't know what to expect. I only knew one thing: I didn't want to be the old me. Not the girl who bent to pick up forks from the floor, or sat silently as a belt whipped her back like a judgment on a life she didn't choose. Evelyn was there early. Her hair was neatly tied back, hands dusted with clay eyes without scrutiny. I stepped in the old sandals from Elijah, still damp with dew. The moment I crossed the threshold, it felt like I'd left another world behind. Here, everything seemed to breathe its own rhythm, slow, steady, honest. Evelyn glanced at me and pointed to a wooden chair. "Here early. Elijah said you'd come back." "Good." I sat, fingers clutching my shirt hem. Want to learn to shape clay, she asked, her voice without challenge or pity. I nodded. Start by feeling it. The clay will tell you what it needs. She handed me a soft lump of clay wrapped in damp cloth and set a small wheel in front of me. I took it, the clay heavy and cold, as if it carried its own forgotten memories. Clay remembers, Evelyn whispered, but it forgives easy. I didn't fully grasp her meaning then, but something in her words stopped my hands from shaking. I pressed the clay onto the wheel fingers, fumbling to shape it. At first, it collapsed, warped off center. I heard Carter's laugh in my head. That's supposed to be a bowl. I shook my head. No, today wasn't for old voices. Today I'd let my hands speak, not anyone else's. If you've ever done something for the first time and realized your hands can remember, tremble, and heal, share it in the comments. Maybe you learned to sew, paint, play an instrument, or cooked a meal no one criticized. Those beginnings deserve to be told. I needed shaped, scraped off excess, pushed back the dents. Finally, before me was a bowl, crooked rim, uneven sides, lumpy, but clearly a bowl. I don't remember when I exhaled. Just felt a lightness spread from my chest to my stomach like a warm breath. Not bad, Evelyn said, standing by my shoulder. Now carve something on it. Give it a name. I took the small wooden tool fingers caked with clay and touched the bowl. I wrote 3 words. Still here. Evelyn looked at the words for a moment, then nodded slowly. You sure are. The bowl was set to dry, then fired. I didn't know if I'd wait to see it finished, but in my heart it was already real proof I was still here. Evelyn showed me how to clean the wheel-arranged tools in order and dilute dry clay for reuse. I didn't ask why she let me do these tasks or if I'd be paid. I just did them. And strangely, I didn't feel tired. With each motion, I felt like I was piecing back together something long, dismantled in my heart. Midday, Elijah returned with 2 sandwiches. He set them on the table, poured more water. This girl heals fast, he said, glancing at the bruise on my arm. No one heals completely, Evelyn replied. But healing somewhere is enough. We ate lunch in silence. No one asked where I came from, why I was here, or what I'd endured. That silence was the greatest gift. It didn't force me to tell. Didn't force me to remember. When you find a place that doesn't ask, why are you like this, but gently says, all right, keep going. You'll understand what it means to be forgiven. Not by others, but by life itself. I never thought I'd see Braden again. Not so soon. Some faces belong to a part of life you don't name, and I'd left his behind the slammed door the night I was kicked out. I thought he'd forgotten me. But that morning, Braden walked through the studio door like nothing had happened. I was stacking clay blocks for the morning pottery class. Kids were gathering their small laughs, filling the space. I loved how they worked with clay carefree, unafraid of mistakes, unjudged. One boy had carved his name in block letters on a cup's rim, Marcus. I chuckled softly and nodded at him. Then the bell rang, a sharper jingle than usual. I looked up and my heart skipped. Braden. Taller, broader shoulders in a gray suit, hair neatly combed, but his eyes were the same cold, mocking, scrutinizing. Well, Elena, he said loudly, dragging the words. You work here. How cute. The class paused for a second. I saw Evelyn's eyes from across the studio, but she said nothing. I inhaled. Exhaled. What do you want? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Oh, just heard someone in the family's an artist. He emphasized the last word like a joke. Thought I'd see this talent for myself. He strolled around his leather shoes, clicking on the wood floor like a challenge. His hand reached for a shelf of unfired pottery, a little girl named Nina's small cup with a sun pattern blooming on it. I stepped forward quickly. Don't touch that! He stopped but smirked. What? It's just clay. It's not just clay. It's a class. It's effort. He shrugged, but deliberately nudged the shelf, making a few pieces wobble. I lunged to steady them. A crooked bowl fell, but didn't break. The kids looked at me confused. Braden shrugged again. Oops, clumsy hands, like you as a kid. I stood straight. My eyes didn't waver. If you're here to drag up the past, don't. You've done enough. The bruises are still there, but I don't carry them to show off. The room went silent. The kids didn't fully understand, but they felt the weight. Evelyn stepped over, standing beside me. Who are you? She asked bluntly. I'm her brother. Well, half-brother, Braden said with a fake smile. Just wanted to visit Elena. Then you visited Evelyn, said, eyes locked on him. This is a place of respect. Please leave. Braden looked at me. Now, you let this lady boss you around, huh? Replacing Dad, Mom, the whole family. I met his gaze. You're wrong. No one here orders me around. I choose to work, choose to stay, and no one needs to hit me to make me listen. Evelyn gestured. A staff member stepped closer. Braden saw the mood shift, gave a thin smile, and turned away. See you, artist, he said. Send me an invite if you get famous. When he left, the bell rang again. Softer, like a period closing an old memory. I turned to the kids, smiling. Let's keep going. Marcus, you need more water for your clay. No one asked questions. The studio exhaled in relief. That evening, as I cleaned the clay trays, I looked at my hands. Steady, not retreating, not cold. I dipped them in water, feeling the smooth mud slide through my fingers. I stood tall today, no shouting, no breaking. I faced an old shadow and didn't fall. On the table, the Still Here bowl was fired, its smoky, purple glaze shimmering crooked, but real. I lifted it, looked inside, and saw my reflection in the glaze and Elena imperfect, but still here. Evelyn walked by, not asking about Braden, just looking at the bowl. You know, she said sometimes the most beautiful things are the ones that were once crooked. They have a reason to exist, and that reason doesn't need anyone else's judgment. I nodded. Tomorrow I'd make another bowl, not to replace the old one, but to prove I'm not afraid to mess up anymore. I never thought people would stand before my work and linger, not because it's perfect. On the contrary, every bowl, every vase in that room is crooked, marked by the trembling hands of someone who once touched clay. But in that imperfection, I poured every breath, every memory, every time my heart raced with fear, and then slowed as I forgave a little. I called my first exhibition the Reforged Wing. Not a new wing, but one that was broken fallen, now pieced back together with fired clay, heavy but steady. I chose the name after sleepless nights. Sometimes I'd lie staring at the ceiling, wondering, will anyone care? But then I'd think of Elijah Evelyn, the kids in the pottery class, the first bowl I carved still here on. And I thought, if I don't tell this story, who will? The opening was held in a small space near the studio, an old gallery with rough brick walls and warm yellow lights. I hand-pasted labels under each piece. One cracked vase was named Father's Voice, for the fracture I felt every time Dad spoke. A small cup pieced from 3 fragments, Forgiveness in Progress. The media wasn't overwhelming. A few local reporters, a senior communications student asking for an interview. But I didn't focus on them. I watched those who stood quietly before the pottery, touching the rims as if asking, "You've been hurt too, haven't you?" An older woman with silver hair paused before my first crooked bowl. She didn't speak, just adjusted her glasses and placed a hand on her chest, as if finding something within herself. I stood at the back, clutching a crumpled speech I'd rewritten 3 times. Evelyn stood beside me, silent as always. Elijah arrived late still in his old jacket, carrying the bag of sandwiches he always shared. When he nodded from across the room, I knew I was ready. I stepped to the podium. The simple mic waited. The lights made me squint, but I didn't turn away. I stood there in a room full of people, took a deep breath, and began. "Thank you for coming. I'm Elena Ruth Bennett." The murmurs quieted. I continued. I didn't come from a fancy art school. I didn't study pottery techniques. I'm just a girl who was once beaten with a belt for refusing to serve her stepbrother, who was kicked out with $1 and a broken arm. No one laughed. No one moved. I saw a boy in the front row, eyes wide, gripping his chair as if afraid to miss a word. I thought I'd disappear. But then I met clay, and I learned. Clay remembers. But it also forgives. I learned to shape it, and through it, I learned to reshape myself. I paused. The applause came not loud, but slow, steady. Hands joined like small waves. I saw Evelyn's eyes, not praising, not pitying, but acknowledging. And Elijah standing there nodding, clutching his bag strap like he did when moved. After the speech, people came to shake my hand. Some asked to buy pieces. Some just looked at me for a long time before leaving. A young man left a note on the guest book. My mom called me a mistake. Thank you. I don't know who he was, but I still keep that note. That night I stayed late to clean up. Evelyn helped dismantle the stands. When she picked up the Still Here bowl, she looked at it one last time and asked, "Want to leave it here? I think it belongs in the studio." I shook my head gently. I want to take it home. Not to look back, but to remind me how far I've come. She nodded. Good. I left alone. The moon hung like a question mark in the black sky. I walked slowly. My once broken arm still ached when the weather turned, but tonight it was warm. The hand that once trembled now firmly held the bag with the crooked bowl, a symbol of what I didn't give up. And I knew I was no longer nameless. I've met many people in my life. Some came back to hurt me again. Some passed by without a glance. But Carter was different. That day, Bakersfield was swelteringly unbearable. I was glazing a new tea set, a special order for a young couple's wedding gift. The studio was calm as ever. The smell of clay, the hum of the wheel sunlight filtering through the dusty glass flecks floating in the air. I heard the bell ring, but this time it wasn't quick, wasn't urgent, wasn't loud. It sounded soft like a hesitant breath. I looked up, and my heart skipped. There he stood, Carter. No longer the 8-year-old lording over the dinner table. Now a tall, lanky young man, shoulders hunched like he was always apologizing, holding a crumpled brown paper bag. I looked at him for a long time. He looked at the floor, then the wall, then finally at me. His brown eyes no longer held the little master glare instead. Something I couldn't read, shame, unease. Heavy. "Hey, Elena," he said softly. That greeting 3 words rang in me like a distant bell from that porch years ago. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't angry, wasn't numb. I was just still. Carter set the bag on the table. He pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. He carefully unwrapped it, a clay cup. Crooked. Strangely, I recognized it instantly, one I'd made in my early days at Cedar Clay, when my hands still shook and clay slipped off the wheel. I remembered because I'd put it in a discard box, but someone, maybe Elijah, had kept it. I found it at a thrift market. Someone sold it. I saw the carving underneath RB. I thought, it must be yours. I nodded. Carter turned the cup hands, still trembling. I remember when I had a fever, you carried me up the stairs, he said, eyes on the table. Back then, I didn't understand. I thought you had to do it. But I remember, your hands were shaking. So much. And you hadn't even eaten. I stayed silent. I remembered that night too. Carter burning with fever while Nora played cards in the kitchen, telling me not to bother her. I carried him upstairs in the dark, my weak arms nearly giving out. We were both cold, both hungry, but I whispered to him until he slept. I thought Carter would never remember. "I'm sorry," he continued, still not looking up, "for treating you like a servant, for not knowing better. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I just want you to know I remember, and I'm sorry." In that moment, something in my chest softened, not breaking, not tightening, just easing, like an old, stubborn knot finally unraveling. I gently pulled a chair closer, sat beside him. Looked at him now, a young man trying to piece together memories that once broke me. I placed a hand on the table, nudging the cup toward him. "You've grown," I said, "and you don't need to apologize anymore." Carter looked up. His eyes were wet lips, pressed tight, holding back emotion. I smiled, not to hide pain, but a real light smile, because I knew I no longer held resentment. We sat together for a long time, saying nothing more. We didn't need to. What needed saying was said. What needed understanding was understood without questions. I offered Carter tea. He nodded, saying yes softly like a polite boy. I poured tea into the cup he brought. Crooked, unevenly glazed, but the tea still smelled good, and his hands no longer shook. That evening as Carter left, I didn't ask where he lived, what he did, or if he still spoke to Dad. I didn't need to hear. Because the one thing I needed and he gave was an honest word from someone I once carried up the stairs in silence. I watched his shadow leave the studio. The door closed softly. Elijah appeared behind me holding a broom. "Looks like someone just learned an important lesson," he said, voice warm. "Both of us," I replied. He smiled, set the broom down. "Forgiveness is choosing to set the burden down without asking if the other person deserves it." I nodded. Elijah never taught me with theories. He just showed up when I needed him, like that first dry cold sandwich years ago, enough to save a homeless soul. That night I went home late. Before turning off the light, I wrote in my notebook he remembered, and I forgave. Some forgiveness doesn't need a reply. Writing it down is enough. I sat alone at the old wooden table in the studio one late afternoon sunlight, streaking across the window, casting soft lines on the steaming teacup. Before me was a blank sheet of paper, a black fountain pen, and a strange feeling readiness. I'd thought a lot about writing to her, the woman I once called Mom, but never truly felt was mine. I used to think I needed her acknowledgement and apology, or at least a look that said she was wrong. But after all these years, I realized I didn't need anything. I just needed to let go. A handwritten letter. Not an email. Not a text. I wanted every word to feel real because this was the last time I'd let that woman touch me even through words. I wrote, "Dear Nora, this isn't to reconnect. Not to blame. I'm writing this because a part of my memory sits in my heart like a small stone not heavy enough to kill happiness, but sharp enough to scratch each time I move forward. I don't resent you. It sounds strange, but it's true. I used to resent you. I dreamed of you crying, begging for my forgiveness and me turning away. But I grew up, and I understood you were just an unhappy woman who learned to control by causing pain. You never hugged me, never brushed my hair, never asked if I was hungry when you made me skip dinner. But you taught me a big lesson. I don't want to be you. Because of you, I know what it's like to lack love. And because of that, I learned to love, even if clumsily. I know how to place my hand gently when a child's clay goes crooked. I know how to ask a homeless person, "Did you sleep well?" without shaming them. I learned not from your light, but from your darkness. Thank you, honestly. Not because you were right, but because I chose not to let you keep being wrong in my heart. I don't need you to read this. I don't wait for your reply. This letter is for closure. Like a final door I shut without regret, without lingerings. You may never have known how to love, but I learned how not to hate. Elena, I read it once, didn't change a word, didn't cross anything out. Each word came from a deep place I once thought was scarred, but turned out to be soil waiting to grow something new. I folded the letter into thirds, slipped it into a brown envelope without a return address. For the recipient, I wrote only Nora Bakersfield. I wasn't sure if she was still there, or if the mailman would find her, but that didn't matter anymore. I left the studio envelope in hand. The sky was lightly clouded, the north wind carrying dust and wild jasmine. I walked to the old post office where I used to go with Dad once a month as a kid. Back then, I secretly hoped for a letter addressed to me just once, but our mailbox was always empty. This time I was the one sending. When I dropped the letter in the box, my chest felt empty, not hollow, but light. Like I'd just taken off a heavy backpack I'd carried my whole life. I stood there for a long time, not expecting a reply, not hoping for a miracle to change the past. Just standing silent, witnessing my own choice of freedom. That night I returned to the studio, sat at the wheel. A new bowl was taking shape. My hands didn't shake. The clay didn't resist. Everything flowed like water, like breath. Evelyn stopped by not asking where I'd been. She just looked at the bowl and nodded. Nice. Got a name yet? I thought for a moment. Maybe, Quiet Door. She smiled. Yeah, that's it. A door closed without noise. I watched the clay dry under the light, and knew I'd come a long way. Some moments have no witnesses, but, they're a milestone. One late autumn morning, Bakersfield softened after weeks of harsh sun. Dry leaves scattered on the sidewalk sunlight through the studio window gentler than usual. I arrived earlier than normal not to shape clay, but to build something a shelf. Not the mass-produced kind from IKEA or glossy wood to pose for photos. I wanted to make it myself from scrap wood old nails things left behind. I never thought I'd learn to build a shelf. But Elijah once said, your hands can learn anything if your heart wants it enough. And that morning, my heart didn't just want it needed. The shelf wasn't big, about 2 handspans wide, a meter tall. But I knew it would hold a lifetime in 3 parts. On the first level, I placed my first bowl. Crooked, unevenly glazed, carved with "Still Here." I'd made it with trembling hands in my first week at Cedar Clay. It was proof I survived. That despite Belt's hunger cold, I was still here, not fallen. I wiped the bowl gently, like touching my childhood heart. Then placed it in the center of the bottom shelf. The lowest level like the ground where I started again. On the second level, I placed Reforged Wing, a ceramic angel wing, white with bronze flecks. I made it after my first exhibition when media noticed when old stories were retold in my own voice. The wing wasn't perfect. It had a small crack on the edge, a flaw I kept on purpose. As Evelyn said, a reforged wing doesn't fly because it's uncracked, but because it learned to fly with the crack. That was the chapter of healing. The phase where I learned to forgive not others but myself for staying silent too long, fearing too much missing chances to live honestly. I looked at the wing for a long time before placing it on the middle shelf, between the crooked bowl and the final piece. Then I opened an old wooden drawer where I kept the bundle of old leather belts Elijah had scavenged for me. The leather was stiff, cracked, torn in places. Some of it resembled the belt that struck me that day, the day I was thrown out with $1 and a broken arm. I'd wanted to burn them. But then I thought, if I can turn pain into something beautiful, the pain no longer wins. I cut, bent, fired. Wove copper wire to form a phoenix, not large, but its stance was proud wings, spread eyes resolute, as if it had passed through fire, unburned. I placed it on the top shelf, phoenix symbol of rebirth. When the shelf was done, I stepped back. Each level was a chapter of my life. Survival, healing, rebirth. 3 chapters, none easy, none without tears but all necessary. Evelyn walked in, standing behind me for a long time. "Beautiful," she said. "Not quite balanced," I laughed. "The right corner's a bit off." "You're off too," she replied. "But you're standing." I smiled. Not because she joked, because I understood. That night I hung the shelf by the window, where the first morning light would touch each piece. I wasn't showing off, wasn't selling. The shelf was to remind me, "Elena, you've come far." Someone asked, "Why not make something prettier for the exhibition?" I shook my head. Beauty isn't for showing off. Beauty is when you look and see a life distilled into form. I went to bed that night with the door cracked open. Moonlight spilled in, illuminating the phoenix, and for the first time in years I dreamed not nightmares, but of flying. I used to think healing was a solitary journey, a quiet path where everyone walks, falls, and stands alone. But one day, I saw something I hadn't considered healing can spread like a small flame from one hand to another. It was a Wednesday, a pottery class for special kids, those not chosen but brought because they need a place to let out what no one understands. Evelyn told me to lead the class. "You were one of them," she said. "Now it's time to bring clay to another pair of hands." The class had 6 kids ages 7 to 11. Some were abandoned, some from foster care, some just called hard to teach. I didn't ask questions. I let each choose a seat clay and way to breathe. Among them was a girl named Lily. Long brown hair tied unevenly, always looking down. She didn't speak all session. Just sat turning a lump of clay in her hands, shaping, rolling, reshaping. No rush, no shyness, but like she was whispering something to the clay. I didn't approach. I let her work at her own pace. Near the end, I walked around checking what each child made. One made a lopsided plate. Another made a 3-legged dog. Another made a bowl with 2 handles because it's weak, so it needs extra grips. When I reached Lily, I stopped. Before her was a tree. Small, tilted. Trunk not straight. Canopy with a few thin leaves. But it stood, unbroken, unfallen. Its roots anchored in a thick clay base. And beneath the roots, she carved a small line. I'm still standing. I stood there silent. Lily didn't look up. Her small hands rested lightly on the table, speckled with clay. I didn't ask why, didn't praise, didn't lecture. I just placed a hand on her shoulder gently. She trembled slightly but didn't pull away. I saw myself at 17, curled up outside a convenience store with bruised hands. I saw myself trembling as I took half a sandwich from Elijah, and I remembered his eyes that day, not pitying, not interfering, just present. Now it was my turn to do that for someone else. I leaned down, whispering, "Your tree is very brave." Lily didn't answer, but she nodded slightly. The class ended. The kids washed their hands, took their small clay bags home. I stayed to clean the tables, sweep clay arranged pieces for firing. Evelyn came over picking up Lily's tree to look. "She didn't say anything to you?" she asked. "No, but I understood." She nodded. Sometimes the most hurt make the truest things. I carefully placed the tilted tree on the firing rack. Gently, like holding a piece of my own memory. That night back home, I didn't sleep right away. I wrote in my journal, and today I saw myself in a small tree by a silent girl. And I understood I'm not alone in this healing journey. There are others, even strangers, walking with me through clay, through hands, through crooked, honest shapes. Next week, I'll deliver the kids' pieces to the foster center. But Lily's tree, I asked to keep it for a while, just to remind me there are still kids holding themselves upright. And sometimes a gentle hand on a shoulder is enough to keep them from falling. I never thought I'd see that face again, especially not in my own studio. That morning I arrived later than usual. The night before, I dreamed of Elijah, though he's still alive, still sitting with me in the backyard shaving clay. In the dream, he smiled, but didn't speak. Just looked at me for a long time. I woke with an empty feeling. Sometimes peace can feel unsettling. When I stepped into the studio, Evelyn gestured toward the small gallery. "Someone's asking for you," she said quietly, as if afraid to break something fragile. I saw her from a distance, hair shorter, dyed darker. Still the expensive sweater, beige handbag, spotless shoes. Only her face was slightly different, not as sharp, but older. Not from age, but from years of not facing herself. I stood a few steps away, didn't approach, didn't run, just waited. "Hello, Elena," she began. I nodded. "You came to see me." She hesitated at my address, then nodded. "I heard, read about your exhibition. Someone sent me the article. I didn't send it. I know, but I read it. I thought, maybe we should talk." I didn't offer her a seat, didn't get water. I stood there like Lily's tree, not straight, but still standing. "Are you still angry with me?" she asked. "No," I answered. "I don't have anything left to be angry about. I know, I was too strict back then, but you know things were hard at home. I was focused on Carter, trying to keep everything stable. Maybe I wasn't tactful." I saw her effort, choosing words, reshaping the story, softening the cuts in memory. But what kept me calm wasn't her change. It was that I no longer needed her to change. I interrupted gently. "You don't get to rewrite this story." She froze. Her eyes swept over me, then around the studio, landing on the wooden shelf on the wall, where my first crooked bowl, the reforged wing, and the phoenix from old belts stood. "You've told it. Your way," she said, unclear if it was blame or acceptance. "Not my way, the truth." She lowered her head. For the first time, she seemed smaller. Not because I was taller, but because I was no longer beneath her. I wasn't bending to meet her gaze. I'd stood up long enough, straight enough to not fear those eyes. "You know," she said, "I still want you to be happy." I believed she meant it, in her way, but it didn't change the past, and I didn't need it to define my future. "Thank you," I said, "but I don't need your permission to live happily." We stood in silence. No tears, no hugs, no redemption or reconciliation. Just distance, not a chasm, but a boundary I'd drawn myself. She left the studio, didn't look back, didn't leave a message. And strangely, I didn't feel relief right away. But I felt clear. Evelyn came over after she left. "You okay?" "Not sure," I said honestly, "but I'm not shaking anymore." She placed a hand on my shoulder like I did with Lily. "That's enough." That night, I walked the old neighborhood, where I once curled up by the bus stop where Elijah shared half a sandwich. I thought of him, his patient silence, how he helped me grow without ever asking for anything. I owe him a hug. I hung it on a morning that was nothing special, not beautiful, not bad, not windy, not gloomy. An ordinary day. And maybe that's what I'd craved most as a child, a day without fear. Phoenix, the bird I made from old belts, now sits on the studio's main wall. I chose the spot myself where the first morning light would touch its wings. I didn't nail it directly. I used a simple wooden frame, not flashy so anyone entering would see, but no one had to crane their neck too high. It's not a large piece, but its shadow under slanted sunlight stretches to the floor, spreading like a shadow that can fly through time. It's not just a statue. It's a piece of memory. A declaration. Proof I chose not to be shattered, but reshaped. I still remember the night I made it. I cut the leather. Each pull and twist dug into my skin. Sometimes it drew blood. Sometimes I wanted to stop. But then I thought of my hands the day I was hit, and I knew if I let it stay as pain, it wins. If I turn it into form, into meaning, I win. I added a small bronze piece to the bird's eye, not to shine, but to remind me eyes that cried can also see beauty. The day I hung Phoenix, a group of students visited the studio. Kids ran around, some asking about the wheel, others curious about the kiln. I let Evelyn guide them, quietly wiping the frame. But then I heard a girl stop behind me. She didn't speak at first, just looked, eyes wide. Small hand lightly touching the wing's edge. "She's like me," she said softly. I turned. The girl, about 7, hair messy, wore a too big dress with clay smudges on the hem. I didn't ask why she said that. I just sat down, looking in her direction. "How's she like you?" I asked, voice soft enough not to scare her. "She got burned, but still flies. I wanted to hug her right then, but I knew a sudden hug could make a hurt child recoil, so I just smiled faintly and said, "Yeah, and so are you. You're flying, even if you're just practicing." She nodded, then ran off with her group as if she'd never paused. I stood there alone, and for the first time I felt no emptiness inside. No locked-off spaces, no dark corners I feared to face. Just fullness. A quiet peace from within, no need for validation, forgiveness, or anyone to hold it for me. If you've walked a painful path and kept your heart soft, leave a line I didn't break. It's not a boast, it's a survivor's declaration. That evening I stayed late at the studio. Not to work, but to be with Phoenix. I turned on the yellow light, its soft glow coating the wall, making the bird's shadow seem to flap. I sat on the small wooden chair looking up. No anger left, no bitterness. No need to shout who was right or wrong. Just the stillness of someone who's completed a circle. I clasped my hands, not to pray, just to give thanks. For Elijah, who gave me half a sandwich. For Evelyn, who trusted a trembling girl with clay. For Carter, who came back and said I'm sorry. And even for Nora, who taught me I wanted to live differently. I whispered almost silently I wasn't shattered. I was reshaped. The next day I got a letter from the nursing home. Elijah had been moved. He was weaker. And maybe I wouldn't have much time left to see him. But I knew before he went I had to do one thing, bring Phoenix to him. I've walked a path no one would choose, abused, abandoned, treated as invisible in my own family. But through every wound, every cold night sleeping on the street, every quiet hand extended, I learned one thing: the past doesn't define you, how you rise does. From the crooked bowl carved with "still here" to the phoenix made from old belt scraps. I didn't just heal myself. I helped others find themselves through clay fire and patience. This story isn't just mine. It's for anyone who's been overlooked, silenced, or shaped into something they're not. You don't need anyone's permission to live true. You just need to start. If this story resonates with you, leave a comment. Tell me what you've overcome. And don't forget to follow the channel because I'll keep sharing stories of hope, rebirth, and the human heart.